I think it's time for a deep cleansing breath. I know. She's given us all permission to use it. Always, often. Boker Tov. So I invite you to please, if you're in the hallway, come on in. We're ready to begin. Thank you. If you're in the back, you're getting water, you have Torah. So the Talmud asks a question that is most relevant to us as rabbis, cantors, and rabbinic pastors and students. What is more important, study or action? In his life, Rabbi Sid Schwarz has his own unequivocal response: both. Rabbi Sid Schwarz has been a congregational rabbi, a social entrepreneur, an author, and a political activist. He founded and for 21 years led Panim, the Institute for Jewish Leadership and Values, an amazing organization dedicated to inspiring, training, and empowering Jewish youth to a life of leadership, activism, and avodah. He's the founding rabbi of Adat Shalom Reconstructionist Congregation in Bethesda, Maryland, where he continues to teach and to lead tefillah. Currently, Sid serves as a senior fellow at CLAU, the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership, where he directs both the Clergy Leadership Incubator, CLE, a program that trains rabbis to be visionary spiritual leaders, and the Renee Kassim Fellowship Program, an international fellowship program on Judaism and human rights for young professionals. In 2007, Sid was named by Newsweek one of the most 50 influential rabbis in North America. He is the author of several very important books for our time: Finding a Spiritual Home, How a New Generation of Jews Can Transform the American Synagogue, which should be required reading for all of us; Judaism Justice, The Jewish Passion to Repair the World, which should be required reading for all of us; and his latest work that so many of us have been inspired by, Jewish Megatrends, Charting the Course of the American Jewish Future. I think what is most remarkable about Rabbi Sid Schwarz is that he has been able to navigate so many distinct and often exclusive Jewish worlds. He spoke about that last night in his board. In fact, one might say his greatest accomplishment is the way he is able to bridge these worlds and open channels between them. We are so delighted to have Sid Schwarz as our keynote speaker at this year's conference. Chevra, Sid Schwarz.
Yeah, I really appreciate that gracious introduction. When I got the invitation, they told me that there was a possibility to come out earlier because there was a Shabbatot, which was kind of connected or not to the Ohalot conference, and I jumped at the chance to clear my calendar because as much as I know of and admire the work of Renewal and was astounded this weekend how many people in this community I know and work with and consider friends and colleagues and teachers, I've never really been in the community. And my Shabbat with you was handsomely rewarded. I have to say, it was just an amazing experience. My wife joined me for Shabbat. She went back yesterday. And the extent to which not only did you greet me so graciously, but I got so much energy from your own community and what you're able to create together. There was a very sweet moment yesterday in the pre-ordination ceremony. I don't know what it's called, but they were greeting new students into the Olive program, and each student was supposed to get up and share one gift that they were going to bring to the community. So one of the new students said, open-heartedness. And then the next student got up and said, I was going to say open-heartedness, but that's taken already. It was a very sweet moment, but one thing is for sure. In this community, open-heartedness, there's plenty to go around. It's not taken. It's actually, it's open-heartedness that I experienced here that continues to give. And that is because, and I'll say this, and Dan made the observation, because of the trajectory of my career, which was in no way planned at all, but it has turned out that I've worked in many sectors of the Jewish world that are very different one from the other. So I've had the advantage of being in this kind of position with the CCAR and the RA and the Reconstructionist Association and in even more diverse groups. But there's an energy that's very unique in this Ohala, Olive Jewish World setting, which you should feel really good about, and thank you for welcoming me as graciously as you have this weekend. So I appreciated the ordination ceremony yesterday, which was so moving. I appreciated the consciousness given by Reb Daniel to the idea of lineage. So let me claim a small bit of lineage about where my life and my rabbinic trajectory oversects or intersects with Reb Zalman and Jewish Renewal. I was a student at RRC in the mid to late 70s, graduated in 1980. And actually, it was in the late 70s that Reb Zalman was invited to teach a course at RRC. He was then at the faculty of Temple University. And Ira Silverman, I believe, invited Reb Zalman to come in and to teach a class. And truth be told, and I'm going to use a metaphor that I used last night and I think I'll return to later on, I talked last night about the consciousness between broadcast and antennas. And somebody came over to me afterwards, where's Jack? Jack came over to me, who's my physicist friend, and he's told me that the instrument, the same instrument that actually broadcasts on as a receiver, is also the same instrument that receives, right? And I talked a little bit last night about the difference between broadcast and antenna work, and that rabbis tend to hone their talents at broadcasting at the risk, and I think oftentimes the liability is that their antennas are way too weak to do the work we need to do. I'll come back to that message. But at that point in time, I have to say that my antennas simply did not tune into the wavelengths on which Reb Zalman was teaching. I didn't get it at all. And last night I talked about the fact there's Shivim Panim LaTorah, which I defined as the 70 wavelengths on which we might receive truth. And the fact of the matter is most of us are only able to broadcast on one or two of those wavelengths, and probably only able to receive about half the number that we can broadcast on. And my antenna did not tune into the broadcast wavelengths of Reb Zalman. But life is funny, and God has a sense of humor. Because over time, things that you hear, sometimes it takes years for wisdom to come to the heart and into the mind. But I digress. The point here is that I was, a couple years afterwards, I was the founding editor of a journal called Ra'ayonot, which was a journal of thought and opinion of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical Association. And at the time, I edited an issue, which was in 1984, called Neo-Hasidism and Reconstructionism. And I did so playing the role of Edward Snowden. I was doing it as a whistleblower because I felt, having my experience with Reb Zalman in class, Art Waskow became very active in the JT at RRC, wrong seminar. And I said, what alien fire has entered into the Beit Mikdash of Reconstructionism? Seriously. That was my experience. So I thought I would out it. And in that issue, which you should get a hold of, is really an important piece. Reb Zalman wrote a piece, Art Reed wrote a piece, Arthur Waskow wrote a piece, Ira Silverman, who at that time was the president of the RRC, wrote a piece, David Choice, who would succeed Ira Silverman, wrote a piece. And it actually was a wonderful airing of what this neo-Hasidic Jewish renewal movement was, how it influenced Reconstructionism. And some of you are aware that there's been a interesting, overlapping, strange, and troubled history between the Reconstructionist movement and Jewish renewal. Those of you in this room who know more about that than I do, but I know enough to say what I just said.
If you want to hear dirty stuff, just come to me.
So the issue is out there. But here's where God's sense of humor comes into play. 2 years after I graduated, I was invited to join the faculty of RC, and I taught a couple of courses. One was Intro to Reconstructionism class. The other class was a class I taught, which was called Creating Alternative Communities, which was actually the beginning of what became my first book 23 years later. So Finding a Spiritual Home was my matured thinking, which I had started early on, about what synagogues might be able to become. And I was already working in a small congregation outside of Philadelphia, Media, Pennsylvania, with my first pulpit. So as it turned out, when I started teaching, Art Green had joined the faculty as an adjunct professor. He was then professor at Penn. And I took the advantage of coming early, before the class that I was teaching, to audit the course with Art. And it took me a while, but I started to understand the connection between the kind of theology that Art Green was teaching and the theology that first drew me to Reconstructionism, which was the classic Kaplanian process theology. I didn't get it until then, and it took me a while to sit at Art Green's feet and to read the Hasidic text and understand that in some ways the leap that Kaplan had made, and he broadcast on one particular wavelength, and at the same time in the mid-20th century, Abraham Joshua Heschel was broadcasting on another channel, but saying similar things, simply on different wavelengths. And it took me a while, but I started to get it. It was the transition from the vertical metaphor of God, with humanity here and God here, to the horizontal metaphor of God, which was the connection between Kaplan's process theology and the theology that I understood to be coming through the Hasidic texts, through the teaching of Rabbi Arthur Green. And over time, I started to understand that what I saw as distinct dichotomies in the Jewish world were actually overlapping truths. And that's when I started to begin to understand how important it is for us to tend more effort to work on our antenna so that we can access perhaps even one more wavelength than before to understand that truth has many faces, as does Torah, at least Shivim Panim. So I want to say a word about the title of this morning's talk, Where Fools Rush In, Spiritual Leadership for a Changing Jewish Community. So truth be told, I'm trained as a historian, but most of the work I've done has been to try to understand the trends and directions of the Jewish community, and to try and develop, create, build institutions that would anticipate not the trends of the previous generation, but rather the trends of the next generation. Now, I learned an important lesson in the years I was a historian. I had a brief, flight of fancy when I thought I would have an academic career. I realized that when you're a historian, if you write an essay or article for a book, if you get one little data wrong, 20 people jump on you in 24 hours, right? But actually, when you predict the future, nobody jumps on you at all. And this is a lesson that was learned early on by economists and weather people, right? Nobody can call you on it until it's way too late. You're out of the room by then, okay? So it's a much lower risk profession to kind of predict the future than try and analyze the past. But I am aware of the passage in Baba Batra that says, from the time of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, prophecy is left into the hands of children and fools. But notwithstanding that sugya, I think we cannot but try and think about the future. And this is where fools rush in. We need to try and take the risk to understand not only the past, but how we can address the future, because if we don't do that, we're going to lose a generation of precious Jewish souls. I decided some weeks ago, and Dan was my chavruta on this, that I wasn't going to talk about Jewish megatrends today, actually. I know a lot of you have gotten the book, many of you have read about it. I understand there have been some buzz around on the Ohala listserv, and actually I'm pleased that there's enough time this morning for some Q&A. I'm happy to take questions about it. I'm going to give you kind of an al-regel achat overview of megatrends, but I want to focus on one particular aspect of what I write about in megatrends. Specifically, what I want to talk about is one of the pillars. So let me just give you the al-regel achat. In Jewish megatrends, and this, if you haven't read the book yet, hopefully this will just whet your appetite. I talk about the interesting moment we're at today in American Jewish history, in this Jewish community, where there's a simultaneous decline, erosion of what I call legacy Jewish institutions, by which I mean synagogues, federations, Jewish community centers, and membership organizations like B'nai B'rith, the American Jewish Committee, groups like that, Hadassah. You take those four sectors, and you are looking at what has been called, I think correctly, the organized Jewish community. And there's always a joke that follows that. But actually, so everyone laughed at the joke that I didn't say. The organized Jewish community, right? But I will tell you this, because I've done a lot of work in the multi-faith sector and in the political activism sector. We don't sufficiently appreciate what an amazing community is that we have built. Most other ethnic groups, religious subgroups in America, look at the Jewish community with tremendous admiration and envy. And so while we can kind of tease ourselves at our lack of organization or our duplication and our failure to address A, B, C issues, all of which is true, we have created an amazing Jewish community. And we live today at a moment when we really are still, I believe, in a golden age of American Jewry. However, if you look at the indicators that most sociologists use to determine the health and well-being of the Jewish community, it all looks like deterioration, decline, and erosion. But that's only if you look at the sector that I just described, the legacy Jewish sector. And so what I did in the book was, I wanted to paint a portrait of comparing that declining sector of legacy Jewish organizations with what I describe as the innovation sector of Jewish life. And as I describe amazing pockets of renaissance around the American Jewish community, I suggest that even though many of those manifestations continue to be on the margins of Jewish life, they represent the seeds of an amazing Jewish renaissance if we can only bring those worlds together. So I talk about four pillars, and I actually describe these pockets of renaissance around the world under four pillars: chokhmah, wisdom, which, by the way, includes a piece of wisdom that Reb Zalman has been teaching for decades, and that is that I think in 50 years, the world will be amazed that religious bodies and denominations thought about their own faith community in silos and not in multi-faith contexts. Reb Zalman is way ahead of his time on this, as on many other issues, okay? But we're now seeing the beginnings of interplay between seminaries that are saying you cannot be a spiritual leader if you don't understand the overlaps and distinctions between your wisdom tradition and the other. And that's a piece of chokhmah, as well as the serious Jewish learning. Second pillar is the pillar of tzedek. I talk about the emergence of social justice as an important pillar for the future of the Jewish community. It's the theme of my second book, Judaism and Justice, which is a theology and a prescription of Jewish social justice and where it can go with the Jewish community. And the third and fourth pillars are Kehillah and Kedusha. And it's there that I want to focus my remarks this morning. Kehillah I define as intentional spiritual communities. And Kedusha I define as helping Jews craft lives of sacred purpose. So if you want to understand more about the four pillars and my analysis of the Jewish community, I encourage the book. But I want to focus here on what is the nature of Kehillah that we have to create, number one. And number two, what kind of spiritual leadership is required to lead such Kehillot? So, quick course on the American synagogue. We've gone through 3 stages, and we're trying to enter into a fourth. When Jews first came to America, they created immigrant synagogues, little shtiblach. When they got a little bit more wealthy, they started moving. Let's use New York as the paradigm. So the Lower East Side, you have these immigrant synagogues and storefronts in people's homes. As people got a little bit more wealthy, they moved to what are called in sociology second areas of settlement. So from the Lower East Side, they moved to the Bronx, to Brooklyn, to Queens, and they created ethnic synagogues. They might build modest buildings, could hire a rabbi with a modest salary. Some of the rabbis were European, some were American trained. Still very modest. In the post-World War II period, Jews acquired a level of affluence. They moved to suburbia. So now from Queens, they moved to Long Island. From the Bronx, they moved to Westchester. From Brooklyn, they moved maybe to New Jersey or wherever. Okay? It's the third area. It's the first time Jews live in areas where they are no longer the majority. These are mixed communities. It's American suburbia. It's portrayed in the classic book by Will Herberg that came out in 1955, Protestant, Catholic, and Jew. And of course, Jews went like this. Because we got equal billing. Only 3.5% of the population in 1955 did equal billing with Protestants and Catholics. More importantly, though, the synagogues that were built in that third area of settlement were what are called synagogue centers. Still the predominant paradigm of American synagogues today. Now, we don't have the time today for me to do my whole rap on American synagogue centers. But they are failing, and they're failing for a reason. And I wanted to only say enough to understand my contrast between the synagogue centers are today and what intentional spiritual communities can and must become as the next stage of the American synagogue. The American Synagogue Center is failing because they are limited liability, low commitment institutions in which the synagogue is essentially in a consumer relationship with Jews. They are marketed in the same way that all commodities are marketed in our American capitalist society. Jews decide they need a certain set of goods and services, primarily education for their children, and hopefully the all-important bar bat mitzvah, which Tamar spoke about briefly this morning. But of course, we know that the bar bat mitzvah, notwithstanding what Tamar said this morning, is the terminal degree of Jewish life. Terminal on two levels. Terminal because it's the last time we'll see a lot of those children in the confines of the Jewish community. And on a macro scale, if you multiply that and extrapolate, it's the end of the Jewish future. We also know, in terms of the affiliation pattern of American Jews, is that most families who make those decisions on a consumer basis, what synagogue offers me the array of goods and services I need, convenient to my domicile, at a fair market price. That's the decision that's made. So you join a synagogue when your oldest child is maybe 5, 6, or 7, and the vast majority of those same families, when their youngest child is 13, 14, or 15, they exit the synagogue community. And during those 10 to 15 years, depending on how many children you have, nothing has changed in the life, the heart, and the neshamas of the Jews who were members of that synagogue center. Nothing. That's the reality. And one of the reasons why synagogue centers today are failing, why all the denominations are wringing their hands about, there are fewer pulpits around, less jobs for rabbis, synagogues are merging or closing their doors, it's happening all over the country, is because today, given the changing economy and the rise of the internet, the goods and services that for a long time a generation of Jews felt they needed to join a synagogue to acquire can be acquired a la carte, more cheaply, and sometimes at higher quality. So the primary draw for Jews to join synagogue centers is evaporating. And that's the Rashi behind the numbers. That's the Rashi behind the numbers. But here's the good news. Over the past 20 years, some important new thing has emerged about the nature of synagogues. The reality is that there's actually a tremendous similarity about what's being written. There's a small cadre of us, 10 or 12, who've been writing and doing a lot of work around the next stage of the American synagogue. And there's a tremendous amount of overlap between those teachings. I'm going to come to that specifically later. What are the specifics of that? But the second piece of good news is that besides some early grouching and foot dragging by seminaries, and I do a lot of work with seminaries across the spectrum, early on when some of the synagogue transformation movements became well known, like Synagogue 2000, which then graduated to Synagogue 3000. Some of you know about STAR, Synagogue Transformation Renewal. When in the early 90s all this stuff started to happen, the seminaries first were saying, oh, you know, these are people on the outside, they're critics, they're complainers, we know what we're doing, don't worry about it, leave us alone. But after that early grouching, and I was at many of those early conferences, the reality is most seminaries today are getting clarity around the fact that the kind of rabbis they're training, and the way that they're training them, and the synagogues for which they're preparing them, will not serve the needs of the American Jewish community of the future. Now, how long it takes to move from that understanding to a change of curriculum, a change of the way you choose students, the way you train students in life, it may take another generation. This doesn't happen quickly. But what's true about seminaries is also true about synagogues. And this is important. Synagogues that are stuck in the synagogue center model, which is doomed in my opinion, and the handwriting is on the wall, if I believed that by training and hiring 100 of the greatest organizational development consultants in the country, and by offering their services for free to synagogues all across the country, if I thought that that would actually help synagogue centers transform themselves into the kind of intentional spiritual communities that I've written about, I'd go out and raise the money and make it happen myself because I care that deeply about it. But here's what I know, having been the rabbi of two different congregations. No matter how skilled the organizational development consultant is, change comes from rabbis. Change comes from inspired spiritual leaders. Change comes from spiritual leaders that have a vision of what a community can look like. And what we don't have enough of is a clarity around what that vision is of the new model of the American synagogue, the fourth stage, the next stage of the American synagogue. Nor do most rabbis have the toolkit, the skills, to bring their synagogues from that synagogue-centered model to the next stage of the American synagogue to create them into intentional spiritual communities. I want to take a moment here to do a quick commercial, okay? There are at least 2, maybe 3 members of this program in the room. For about 10 years, I've been running retreats for rabbinical students from now 11 seminaries. And how many people have been on those retreats? Stand up if you've been on one of those retreats, please, because it's been a pleasure for me to see how many of you have been on the retreats. We now have about 400 students, who were students, thank you, who have come to the program. Those retreats focusing on reimagining the American synagogue and on how we integrate spirituality and social justice in our communities. That's been the focus point. But here's what happened, and this is important, although it's autobiographical, I think it will actually provide some context for what I'm about to say. Over the years, I've tracked some number of the alumni of those student retreats that I've been running. And the sad fact is that the more we get rabbinical students who are rabbis to be excited about a vision for the kind of community that can really be vibrant, committed deeply to issues of social justice, to spirituality, to lives of sacred purpose, to connecting to God, to be understanding how much we can learn from other faith communities and the like. The more there's been a crash and burn phenomenon among those newly minted rabbis. Because when you take rabbis and you get them all excited about that, and then you put them in the context without the toolkit to change an institution from what it is to what it can be, it is so damn frustrating. And the more you care, the more you either try and work yourself to death, or you walk away. And I became concerned at that phenomenon. And to the extent that I care deeply about the future of the American Jewish community, and I had a sense, because I've had the privilege to lead 2 amazing synagogue communities, I had a sense of what's possible in the synagogue space. I wanted to try and address that. And so there's a new program that we've just launched under the auspices of Klal, called CLE. That was an intended pun when we developed the term for it, because we're working with Clay Kodesh. And the Clergy Leadership Incubator is a 2-year program for early career rabbis, providing both the vision of what those communities can and must look like, and the toolkit to move communities from what they are today to what they have to become. Because some subset, a small one, of rabbis may go out and create and found their own communities, as I've done, but many more will move into synagogues that have an existing paradigm, and synagogues are no different than any other institution. There's a built-in resistance to change. Whether you're talking about a corporation, or a nonprofit, or a school, every institution has built-in